Yo, welcome everybody. It's Travis Manson, otherwise known as SmallmouthCrush, down here at the Bassmaster Classic. I'm actually in the St. Croix booth, and we're going to be taking a little bit of time and talking one of my favorite techniques when it comes to fishing, bass fishing, really, both largemouth and smallmouth, and that is finesse fishing. And so I love myself a good spinning rod, and in my opinion, there's no better rod on the planet when it comes to spinning and bait casting rods than the St. Croix. And we're going to kind of break down a couple different rods that I really like, rods that I use on a regular basis that helps me definitely put more fish in the boat. But before we get into that, I want to give you a little bit of background about myself. I actually grew up in the home state of St. Croix. I grew up in Wisconsin, a little bit away from where they're way up north. I grew up in Winneconne, near Lake Winnebago. So my home body of water growing up was Lake Winnebago, the Bay of Green Bay. And at that time, I really didn't even know what a bass was. I was a walleye guy. And so I spent a lot of time trolling for walleyes, fishing cane beds, shallow structured rock piles. And I always had a spinning rod in my hand for the most part. So at an early age, a spinning rod just felt right, felt like home. And so as I got into bass fishing, it was actually kind of an interesting story. I was approached by Mercury back in 2007, and they had an open spot to fish on the Bassmaster Elite Series as a co-angler down on Lake Amistad. That's the tournament when Ish Monroe won the very first Elite Series. But they sent me down there, and at that time, I had no idea what a Senko, what a brush hog, what anything was. I didn't know anything about bass fishing, right? I'd actually catch a few here and there. But going down there that week and hanging out with some of the elite guys, you know, Aaron Martins, Skeet Reese, all the big names, and then practicing with them for the whole week, it just changed the whole course of my life. Like, I would not be here today if it wasn't for that week down on Lake Amistad. Because after that, I went back to Wisconsin. I sold the walleye boat and bought a bass boat. I started fishing on Lake Winnebago, entering tournaments, local tournaments. And it took me a while. It took me about a year or two to really get the feel for things. But one thing about smallmouth in particular, they relate to a lot of the different structure and ways that a walleye would actually relate. So it wasn't that hard of a learning curve, although the largemouth game, of course, grass fishing, things like that, I had to learn a little bit more about that technique. And in 2010, I decided to actually try to qualify for the Bassmaster Elite Series. And so I fished the Northern Opens, and somehow I was able to qualify for the Elite Series and was able to fish on tour for 2 years, 2011, 2012, until the money ran out, right? It was about $100,000 to fish professionally. And at that time, sponsorship was hard to come by. Gas was close to what it is today, almost like $4 a gallon. And I was fishing against guys like KVD on lakes I've never been to with some pretty poor equipment. I remember setting up on a vertical piece of structure in one of the events with an old spinning rod and an old reel. And I remember setting a hook, and the anti-reverse was broke, and I started backlashing. So I think I'm the only guy that actually backlashed a spinning reel in my life. And needless to say, I lost that fish. And after that moment, I realized I have to really get serious with the equipment that I use. Having the right gear and being able to control what you can control before you get out on the water has been key for myself, as well as developing, I guess, techniques or approaches to fishing that you are comfortable with and you have confidence in. And so for me, 80% of the time, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, 80% of the time when I'm fishing, I'll have a spinning rod in my hand. That goes for both smallmouth and largemouth. I just feel like it's a natural way for me to fish. It allows me to be able to proactively go out there and target these fish and fish pressured bodies of water. I mean, in this day and age, a lot of people are fishing that structure. It's hard to win power fishing nowadays, especially in some of these tournaments where there's 150, 200 boats. That lake's been beat up for a week for practice. And so being able to adapt to those situations and having a bait or a handful of baits at my arsenal that I can use and be able to go and target those areas, I just always naturally gravitate towards a spinning rod. And so this year, St. Croix came out with the Victory rod lineup of rods, which have been awesome. I've actually have a bunch of them, and for the last month I've been playing around. I'll tease you a little bit. There's a couple different rods. One, a spy bait rod that I've been blown away by. In fact, you'll be able to see on my channel in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be putting up some various videos regarding these different rods and the situation that I'll use them with. But if you want a rod that's going to launch a spy bait, which is very effective for smallmouth and largemouth, keep that in mind, it will launch a spy bait the furthest I've ever seen a rod launch a spy bait. Blown away by it. And that's one of the keys, especially the places I fish, and the way I like to finesse fish is making sure you can make a long cast, especially if you're in clear water, pressured water, and getting that bait way out there and presenting that bait properly to the fish. And so there's a lot of great rods in the lineup. The first one I want to touch base with here is called the Max Light Weighted. It's 7.3. It's a medium light power Victory rod. And so for me, and there's a lot of, so everyone has, as far as the length of a rod or the action, you're going to really have to experiment. And one rod might say it's a great drop shot rod, and that might be what it's labeled for, but you might find it works better for you throwing a Ned rig. And so you want to be a little bit of have a little bit of versatility in yourself, and when you're looking at these rods, to not just get, tied down to what they have on the handle. You have to find out what that rod and what specific technique that rod will be able to do for you. But this here rod would be a great drop shot rod, which is something I do quite often. I am a fanatic when it comes to drop shotting, whether it be for smallmouth or largemouth. And when we talked about some of the higher end level rods that I use on a daily basis, because not only am I filming for my YouTube channel, fishing tournaments, but I also guide full time. And so I guide full time on the Chesapeake Bay as well as Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. So I'm fishing for largemouth and smallmouth. And these two rods right here, really the majority of the time are the rods that I'm using. One's going to be the 7-foot medium, new Legend St. Croix Xtreme. And this is probably, so the old Legends, if you guys remember the green handled, the green blanks, those are the Xtremes I've used for years, and I loved them. I've caught thousands of fish with them, and it just felt right in my hands. I was hesitant picking these up because whenever, change, right? You're always like, I've been fishing these rods for 5, 6, 7 years, and now they come out with something even different and better, and definitely better. The feel, they're actually a lot more sensitive. We're actually going to have a full video on my YouTube channel breaking down all these rods, and we're going to bring in some experts that are really going to go deep into the making of this particular Legend Xtreme and what makes this the ultimate spinning rod out there. Again, it's a high-end rod. You get what you pay for. If you want to be an efficient finesse angler, if you want to have the confidence that you have the best rod available in your hands, it's going to be the Legend Xtreme. And so this is a 7-foot medium, and they also have a 6-foot 10-inch medium light. And there's two different applications as far as drop shotting that I use both these rods for. This 610 is going to be an excellent rod when you're drop shotting deep water smallmouth and you're fishing right below the boat. So a lot of times when I'm out there in that 20, 30, 40 foot of water, and I'm using my electronics to locate big schools of smallmouth, and I try to get over these fish, and one of the best ways to present that bait is drop shotting. And drop shotting is really simple. All it is a little weight, and then you have a leader with a hook, and then you tie on your appropriate, plastic, whatever you're trying to imitate. A lot of times for me, it's a goby. So I'm going to have a goby imitator, and listen, I can go on for 3 hours just about drop shot weight. So we don't have that kind of time. But there's a lot to it. But really, to try to keep this simple, a weight that's going to get down there quick to those fish, a leader length that you feel is the appropriate depth to target those fish. So for me, it could be anywhere from 8 inches to 2 feet, and then some type of plastic. I use a lot of goby imitators. I use a lot of shad imitators. I use a lot of worms. And I'll nose hook it, I'll wacky rig it. And I'm basically looking for that fish on the graph, and I have my rod ready to go. Oftentimes I have the bail open and I'm just holding it with my finger, and I'm just cruising along trying to find one on the graph. As soon as I do, I let go, I drop that bait to the bottom. I don't put a lot of action in this. This rod is super sensitive, and I'm also going to be using braid. I use a light braid. I really like Cortland braid. I use 5-pound braid to either a 6 or 8 pound fluorocarbon leader. And when I'm dropping it down on these fish, with this setup, with that light braid, it's going to allow you to get that bait down there really quick. With this rod, this super light, super sensitive rod, and I like a reel that's going to be in that 3000 series. You know, a 2500 series will work too. I prefer a 3000. I do like a little bit higher gear ratio spinning reel if I can. And so when I'm fishing that, I'm just dropping that bait down. I'm trying to make contact with the bottom, not really working that weight at all. I want that action of the worm, and I just want to kind of shake it a little bit in place. And all you're going to do is normally you're going to feel just a little tick, or your line just might start to move, and you're going to feel a little bit of weight. And you basically just reel straight up and set the hook, and then the fight's on. Now this 610, you probably can't see what. A lot of times when I'm testing a rod, I like to take the rod tip, make sure you have some carpet, and I really like to just see what that action of that rod does. And if I actually had some line on this, I'd be able to show you, but you got to take my word for it. This rod for deep water drop shotting is the best rod you're going to be able to find out there to use for that technique. Now, a lot of times I'm going to be casting a drop shot, so I'm not necessarily looking for them on the graph, but I'm casting a drop shot to cover. So it might be an isolated rock pile. I might be up in shallow water. Listen, the drop shot isn't just for deep water. I might be in 2 feet of water looking for cruising smallmouth up shallow. And that's when I'm going to take this 7-foot St. Croix Legend Xtreme in the medium and cast that drop shot to those fish. And the reason why I like this one is because it just has a little bit better backbone. It still has a great tip. You're still going to be able to set that hook properly. But because I'm casting, and oftentimes I'm setting a hook 30, 40 yards away at the end of a long cast, I want just a little bit better backbone to that rod. Not to say you can't do it with this 610 medium light. You certainly can. But if you have the capabilities to be able to have both these rods, that's what I would choose, the 7-foot medium when you're casting. Now, a couple other finesse techniques that I really like. This 7-foot medium rod, even for largemouth, this is going to be my go-to rod whenever I'm going to fish a tube, smallmouth or largemouth. I fish a lot of Ned rigs. I fish a lot of Ned rigs that are even a little bit bigger than a standard Ned rig. It's still a finesse approach, but I use it a lot of times for largemouth fishing. And so when you get in areas, even with whether it be hardcover or grass, oftentimes you're going to see, and I'm going to give you a little hint right here, I use the Z-Man Big TRD a lot. 80% of the time when I'm finesse fishing for largemouth, I'm using that bait. And I'm using it on this setup, this rod, and now I'm going to step it up just a little bit, okay? I know it sounds crazy. I went from 5-pound braid, and now I'm going to go to either a 10 or a 15. So if you fish areas, if you want to start finesse fishing areas where these largemouth are around docks or around wood, or perhaps there's a lot of man-made structure that's a little bit risky, right? A lot of break-offs, maybe you have a lot of zebra mussels, and that's when I would step it up a little bit with the braid. And so for my fluorocarbon leader, I would go with 8, 10, 12. I have gone up to 14 if I can get away with it, but a lot of times I find myself using 12-pound fluorocarbon with this exact setup. Again, a 3000 series spinning reel on this. And I'm going to be throwing these Ned rigs out there. I'm going to be throwing tubes, whether it be exposed hook or Texas rig tubes. I throw a lot of worms. I fish a lot of Texas rig worms with a 1/16 or a 1/8 ounce Texas rig weight, fishing it around, again, any hard structure, you know. So the Chesapeake Bay is really my home body of water when it comes to largemouth fishing. And those are the main techniques. So I'll have 3 or 4 of these rods ready to go on a daily basis with that Ned, with the drop shot, with a tube, and with a Texas rig worm. I'm also going to throw a lot of wacky rigged stick baits. And oftentimes, whether it be a 4 or 5 inch stick bait, this is the rod I'm going to use for that technique. It's an excellent rod for skipping those baits around docks as well, getting it up under. And it's just, I kind of consider this rod, it's an extension of my hand. Like, it fits perfectly, the feel, like it, I couldn't ask for a better rod. The 6'10" medium light, again, for deep water drop shotting, this is the rod for me. But there's also a bunch of other applications you can use this rod with as well. Whenever I'm going to fish a finesse bait like a TRD, so now we're talking to 3-inch baits, or even some of these smaller creature baits. I'm talking 1/16, 1/8, maybe a 3/16 ounce head, and I want to get real finessey, which is something I do all the time. I'm going to use this 6'10" medium light. I'm going to go back to that 5-pound braid, 6 to 8 pound fluorocarbon leader, and that's going to allow me to really make those long casts with these really small finesse baits. A lot of times they're less than 1/8 of an ounce if you count the plastic as well as the jig head. And so you really want to be able to make that long cast. And then again, what you're going to notice with that bait and with this rod and working that bait through the structure, whether it be rocks, is this rod is really going to allow you to feel everything. You're going to feel every little piece of structure that bait's going over. And that's key. A lot of times, my bites, especially when I'm fishing these Ned rigs, whether it be the 7-foot medium or the 6'10" medium light, is I want to get that bait hung up just a little bit in that cover, whether it be grass or hard structure, so rocks, and I'm just working that down, and I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel it get caught. With the sensitivity, you know that you have a snake coming up, but most of the time, that's right when that fish is looking at your bait. And so I'll continue to bring that bait into that snag, and I'll start giving it some shakes. And sometimes I can just give it enough where it's going to pop that bait off of that snag. And the whole key with this, with any time I'm fishing finesse, whenever I pop it off that snag, I have to dead stick it immediately, meaning I don't move that bait as soon as it pops off. I let it sit there. More oftentimes than not, especially if you're dialed in, if you're in the right zone, there's going to be a fish looking at that commotion and seeing that bait, and that's when they bite. Now, other times, when I'm bringing that over that structure, I'm stuck and I cannot shake it off. I have to get pretty aggressive, and what happens is it's hard to explain or demonstrate, but it involves a quick snap and a pull straight up with the rod. And I'll do that multiple times, 6, 8, 10 times, and try to snap that bait free from that snag. And sometimes I can do it, and sometimes I can't. Sometimes you got to break off. But the whole key is to try to get that bait to make that commotion, and then all of a sudden that snap, it might be the 8th, 9th, 10th time you snap it, that bait's going to shoot up, and then it's going to fall right next to that structure it was just stuck on. And that's when you're going to get the bite. I can tell you, so far this year, I had 3 key fish in tournaments when that technique, and it was literally 8, 10, 15 snaps of the rod before I got it off a snag. I immediately went to dead sticking, and that fish bit. And they were monster bass on a little Ned rig. And that's how I pretty much, fish those Ned baits, any of those finesse baits. And again, it's just a confidence thing. I certainly love throwing a bait caster, okay, who doesn't, power fishing. And there's a lot of different, you can even throw finesse baits on bait casters, don't get me wrong. But again, going back to this, the Legend Xtreme, the 7-foot medium, the 6'10" medium light, those are the 2 rods you're going to see me throw most often. And I am super excited to start experimenting with these new Victory rods because, again, they have a hair jig rod coming out, which is going to launch those hair jigs further than any rod out there. The spy bait rod, again, awesome rod, and we're going to make a lot of videos on the YouTube channel moving forward this year demonstrating some of the different techniques that we're going to be able to use and which Victory rod I recommend for those specific techniques. Again, we can go on and on, but I think we covered a lot in a short period of time here. It's been a long, long week. I hope everyone who's down in this area can stop by the St. Croix rod booth, check out the new Legend Victory rods, check out the new Xtremes. Definitely check out the Wayne and just enjoy your time down here in Texas. Don't forget to head over to my YouTube channel, SmallmouthCrush. I'm doing a live video every week. We also have the SmallmouthCrush podcast where we're talking with the top 52 smallmouth bass anglers across the country. And we really get into some of their secrets and what makes them one of the top anglers out there. And then I also put out just a general fishing video once a week, whether it be a tournament, whether it be practice, or just a how-to video. So we're trying to pump out 3 videos a week, and it's been a lot of fun. Again, I want to thank everybody for watching the show today. And as always, until next time, we'll see you guys on the water.